welcome back to the Filthiest Casual. My name's Quinn, and you know why I'm here. I'm here to talk to you about play versus environment. I'm here to talk to you about community, and most importantly, how those play into flesh and blood. But today specifically, I really want to kind of break down into game philosophy, game design, the tenets that are core to designing a piece of content, and then the measurement of what we expect players to take away from that. So looking at like my first impression of Flesh and Blood back when I first saw it at the beginning of last year, the big takeaway for me was the four core tenets of game design were built perfectly for player versus environment, and I had no doubt that this was coming along the way. To kind of give you a little bit of a refresher, those four core game designs were start full. The big thing is this isn't like other games you've played. It's not Pokemon ramping up energies. It's not Magic the Gathering ramping up lands. It's not the WoW TCG or the Versus system with their resource systems going face down or whatever else. You're not building up to this big epic moment. You start full. Have you ever watched like a boxing match? Does the fighter perform in round four the same way they did in round one typically? I mean, there's this weight and there's this fantasy feel behind it where we're mortal, you know. So you come into this matchup, this 1v1, and you're amped up and you're ready to go. But that also gives you all those actions and supplies in your pool that you're building with and you're engaging your opponent with, and every choice there matters. So starting full, the entire engine behind Flesh and Blood is brilliant, and it's the tempo that makes it magical. And looking at a player versus environment encounter, like really thinking about starting full, yeah, you're taking on a threat. And this is a threat that's a threat to the whole region, to the whole continent. You know, this is something that's world ending. And you know, your character really should feel some kind of attrition from the fight, you know, be worn down and weary and every move mattering. The second design philosophy they had was reduced variance, and this, I think, is a very positive change. But I think we have to actually align variance into two categories. I think there's the kind of variance, which is probably why they said reduced variance. There's a level of variance that's punishing, and there's a level of variance that's engaging. And so how do we define the two? How do we build around the two? And how do we actually implement them? The third and fourth design philosophies really do build off of each other. You're looking at every card counting, and you're looking at rewarding good decisions and not just sheer dumb luck. Um, every card counts is a very brilliant design philosophy, knowing that obviously you can attack with this or defend with that or pitch it for a resource. But when I hear that core design tenet, I don't look at every card counts in my deck. I say every card counts in my collection, you know, because the idea is that with player versus environment content, you're not playing into this constructed pool. You know, it's a supplemental product that's kind of sitting to the side that has its own strengths and weaknesses, and you got to figure that out. You got to find yourself along the way. And there's this idea of rewarding good decisions and not just good luck or dumb luck that really is important to that too, because the idea is that you're playing with multiple people, right? And so there's this idea that you have to work together, and there's weight in everything that you choose, whether you're more selfish with a turn versus assisting or protecting or associating yourself with one of your teammates. How do you approach this, and how do you stack your deck? How do you build your deck? There's four core tenets of game design for Flesh and Blood pave the way perfectly for player versus environment. So I have to be honest with you as well and say that I had a moment of doubt. I wouldn't have expected it, and it kind of caught me off guard. It was really a low moment for me with Flesh and Blood back at the start of preview season with Monarch. I think the very first preview cards we had were for Shadow Brute, and this is after all the hype of people experiencing what they were telling us what they think might be coming about regarding, you know, the big completion of the game from James White. You know, kind of looking at, well, what is it? Is it manipulation of the arsenal? Is it going to be, what were the possibilities? They were endless. People were guessing it could go any which way. And so I think when we actually had, you know, the Wizard of Oz pull the curtain back and we saw talents, I was almost a little overwhelmed in the idea that I felt the game was only going to go forward in a constructed like 1v1 kind of format. And I think for a hot minute, I had this moment of doubt that maybe PvP or PvE wasn't really going to be a thing, and that it was maybe being thrown under the bus and thrown to the side. Then within 2 hours, James White released his article titled "Hidden Talents," and he kind of broke into the idea that there were some core ideas that I wanted to focus on when I first developed the game. He was looking at the whole immersive hero versus hero like fantasy fights. He wanted to focus immediately on reduced variance, and then he wanted to focus on the whole sealed deck and booster draft experience. But the core takeaway and the salvation in that article alone, and let me just say, the article was magnificent, and I appreciate it even to this day, because that little lack of faith I had was completely restored in that first game design philosophy he had, and it was that whole immersive hero versus hero fantasy themed combat. Which goes back to those major four tenets as well. Like, you're looking at starting full, like the whole battle of attrition, wearing yourself down, every choice matters. It was brilliant. And the whole focus on the immersion and the fantasy tropes, I think, are what kind of set me back into being saddled back up and strapped back in and ready to go. So, really, what I kind of want to break down into this, if we're looking at game design and what they've designed thus far, do we need added design philosophies to those to make player versus environment really a thing? So what I want to kind of look at are three general ideas I've thrown out there for myself, like looking at if I were to kind of just play around and think about how player versus environment would even launch in Flesh and Blood, what would they want to focus on first? And this is all extrapolated from my experiences and my aspirations for it. Don't take anything as a definitive thing it needs to be. Challenge it, because the only way we can ever make this better is if we actually talk about it and communicate about it. But the first thing I have for you, first and foremost, the most important thing about PvE is it has to be challenging, and therefore thus being engaging. So this is one fear that I have, that PvE finally launches. We go to our local game store, we challenge it the first time, and then based on what cards exist or what's already in the pool or what's releasing with a new set, we have the tools already, and it seems almost idiot-proof. And we go in, we challenge it, we overcome it, we get our prize, we leave. And that to me is not engaging. The idea is that it's a challenge. This is a threat to our way of life, for our characters, for the fantasy, for the story. There has to be weight to it. And personally, if I go and challenge one of these decks, I want to be beaten to hell and back. I want to actually experience it and be like, oh, that was a thing. That was a card. I never even expected that to even happen. Well played. And I want to lose so I can learn how to get better at it and overcome that threat. But at the same time, when it comes to the whole engaging aspect of a player versus environment encounter, I don't want each deck design to have just like one kind of trope to it or one archetype. I want it to actually have support cards in there that kind of change the strategy in the moment. Because if you look at constructed PvP right now, a lot of it comes down to, which I'm not a master of any of this, so please correct me in the comments down below if I'm completely wrong on some of these things. But I think one of the cool balances behind having multiple classes strung out in the game is, how does the warrior play against the brute, or how does the warrior play against the guardian? Each one has a different toolkit. What are the cards I need to save for late game, stacking my deck, pitching, discarding, whatever I need to do? What's going to be a necessary resource for me later on playing against this class versus this one? And I think that should definitely apply to the player versus environment content, because I want a raid deck to consist of an idea of, okay, this time I'm against a guardian, a runeblade, a ninja, and a mechanologist, versus next time I might be against an illusionist, a light warrior, and then a wizard, and then a brute. Like, it could go any way. And so knowing the hero types and the hero classes and the toolkits that they bring to the table should actually kind of play into the way that the raid encounters themselves are designed, and how you engage with your opponents based on which one you're facing. So it also takes a little bit more knowledge of the game as a whole and all the classes and archetypes across there. But the goal is that engagement, that when you encounter it and you're in there and you're playing, you're making decisions and you're playing the same way that the heroes are, and that you're kind of stacking your deck for the threats that are coming later, or potential threats that may be coming early on versus mid game. The last piece I want to talk about the game being challenging is there's always this long-term fear that as the game goes wider and new generics are printed, that one of these raid encounters, one of these PvE encounters, can eventually just be outclassed, and it's never really worth playing again as well. So what existed in, right now, 2021, nothing. What comes out in 2022, 23, will those be worthwhile to play against? Will they still be engaging? Will they still be challenging in 2025 or 2027? Will they still last? Will you want to go to your local game store and be like, hey, let's have a night of just playing this one. We haven't played this one in a while. Like, let's have this experience again. Do you remember all the key cards that are actually really engaging with it? Do you know how to play it? will we actually have cards printed down the line that will kind of make some of these decks no longer a challenge or even worth playing? So that's one fear I have. And so one potential solution you could have there from a design standpoint is maybe player versus environment challenges, the supplemental products, have a sideboard built into it intentionally. And maybe that could be an early piece of like a hard mode encounter, but it could also be supplemental to actually help the game piece, I guess, have that replayability down the road were certain cards to come out or certain classes or archetypes that come out that kind of potentially nullify some of the challenges that existed in the original game design. If I have to look at a second thing that I think needs to be a design key point of play versus environment is always the immersion into the story. There's this ever evolving world of Wraith, and the story is rich and it's vibrant, and we're to the point now where we have articles on all the characters, the realms, the zones, but we don't have books yet. I'd love to see books come out. I remember back in the day with Magic the Gathering, getting my fat packs and getting a book to kind of read with it, and they would kind of follow along with a story. So you'd open a pack, get a legendary card, and like, oh yeah, that's the guy who did this. If I'm giving you a personal moment, one of my weaknesses as a child was reading comprehension. I wasn't really big into reading a lot of books. And back when I was around 10 or 11, got back into Magic and got those fat packs and got those novels. And the first one I ever read was Onslaught, the story with Kamal becoming more of a druid, losing his sister Jessica. I remember key moments of that, like the illusions. The characters were amazing. But the Magic books is what I'm trying to get at, were almost core to my development, and I fell in love with the story. And as Magic went on over the years, I wanted to read more and more and more, and we're to the point now where the story doesn't really exist as much as it used to. So to me, the immersion into the world of Wraith is the most important thing we could possibly ever lose sight of going down the road, and PvE kind of helps keep that story alive. I mean, just imagine, we're past the age we had Invasion Block, the fall of Urza, and really the kind of leap forward from Dominaria. You get to the point with the whole Rise of Power with Nicole Bolas. Imagine if that in Magic, if Magic had the systems in place where PvE could really be a thing. Could you imagine the whole release of the War of the Spark era? And you have this PvE content come out where it's like you're the planeswalkers on the plane trying to stop Nicole Bolas's rise from power. Like, wouldn't that be this epic engagement? Like, that's what the culmination of years of storytelling through the cards that were just coming to a point, and it was coming to a head, and it was brilliant. And I wanted to experience it, but the way the game's designed, you really couldn't. So now we have an opportunity in Flesh and Blood where this beautiful world can actually be played out year after year, and there's these moments in histories that we might be able to actually be a part of. The last thing I really want to kind of focus on is players have this opportunity to be epic and actually be the hero, and that makes more sense when you actually look at the card design that exists already. I want them to be able to be epic. Players should have a moment of feeling powerful, and that's the point of playing a hero, right? They're the masters of their arts. But the beauty of Flesh and Blood is the balancing comes from the intellect of your characters, so your card hand. It comes from card draw. It comes from the damage ratios. It comes from the mechanics that limit, card accessibility. We have cards now like Coax of Commotion. We have Gorganian Tome. We have that utility kind of spread the love. And so on this whole like third idea of game design, you have this moment of being epic, or this setup for being epic, but that also comes from playing as a team. And the whole point of this game mode as well is to be more casual and to kind of involve more people and bring people in, and people who've never played the game, let them join in on the experience, borrow a deck, and have fun. It's the teamwork. It's the element of playing with other people and the people around you. So you have this moment where you could imagine you start the game. You start this encounter. Hopefully you don't draw the Gorganian Tome first thing, because then you just got Arsenal and hope for the best if you're the major damage character. But you could play out the entire encounter and kind of stage it and set each other up. It's like playing a game of basketball, passing the ball back and forth, setting each other up for the right moment on the board. So you're working together to mitigate damage. You're working together to implement damage or crowd control or whatever the mechanic in the encounter might be. And then at that point, when you have that chance for that killing blow, you have the Coax to pass out the extra actions, the extra draws. Gorganian Tome, after 2 or 3 are already in the graveyard, getting that 4 or 5 card hands taken to a 6, 7, 8 card hands. Like, it's brilliant. And that's that moment where you can have a surplus of resources at your disposal with a surplus of actions. And if you've gotten to that late game and you've kind of played off one of those first basic tenets, reward good decisions, not good luck, you come back to this point where you've already set the stage and you're ready for that killing blow, and you've worked together to stay alive up to this point and actually get that moment to be the hero. So you're engaged and you're role playing with your character, and you're actually cooperating as a team and overcoming this threat as a group. And you have cards that exist that are kind of setting the stage and enabling you to play the way you're playing. So those are some of those core ideas that kind of play into game design. What do we hope people experience while they're playing it versus what do we hope they take away by the end of it? So that's part of that whole building on the community, building on the world, and building on the experience. So let me know what you think. Like, honestly, are some of these ideas kind of silly, not necessary? Can we just take the basic tenets of what establishes Flesh and Blood to be Flesh and Blood and just carry that forward? Or do there need to be more philosophies kind of put into it to kind of play all of this out? Let me know in the comments below. If you think it's great, let me know. If you think it's silly, let me know. Because the only way we can ever make this better and make it build upon itself is if we actually talk about it and actually give the idea life. What do we want this experience to be? What do you want it to be? Where do you want to play it? How do you want to experience it? Let me know, So I appreciate you being here. I hope this was a fun conversation, and I hope that you have a lot of hope for what Flesh and Blood can really be when it comes to player versus environment and exploring more of the world of Wraith. Until next time, thank you.